ask you this question because you probably will say it's everything, but let's try to think through this, because you're in a very interesting position where DeepMind is a place of some of the most brilliant ideas in the history of AI, but it's also a place of brilliant engineering. So how much of solving intelligence, this big goal for DeepMind, how much of it is science? How much is engineering? So how much is the algorithms? How much is the data? How much is the hardware compute infrastructure? How much is it the software compute infrastructure?
Yeah.
What else is there? How much is the human infrastructure? And like just the humans interacting in certain kinds of ways in all the space of all those ideas? And how much is maybe like philosophy? What's the key? If you were to sort of look back, like if we go forward 200 years and look back, what was the key thing that solved intelligence? Is it the ideas or the engineering?
I think it's a combination. First of all, of course, it's a combination of all those things, but the ratios of them changed over time. So even in the last 12 years, so we started DeepMind in 2010, which is hard to imagine now because 2010, it's only 12 short years ago, but nobody was talking about AI. I don't know if you remember back to your MIT days. No one was talking about it. I did a postdoc at MIT back around then, and it was sort of thought of as look, we know AI doesn't work. We tried this hard in the 90s at places like MIT, mostly using logic systems and good old-fashioned AI, we would call it now. People like Minsky and Patrick Winston, and all these characters, right? And I used to debate a few of them, and they used to think I was mad thinking about that some new advance could be done with learning systems. And I was actually pleased to hear that, because at least you're on a unique track at that point, right? Even if all of your professors are telling you you're mad.
It's true.
And of course, in industry, we couldn't get, it was difficult to get 2 cents together, and which is hard to imagine now as well, given that it's the biggest sort of buzzword in VCs and fundraising's easy and all these kind of things today. So back in 2010, it was very difficult. And the reason we started then, and Shane and I used to discuss what were the sort of founding tenets of DeepMind, and it was various things. One was algorithmic advances. So deep learning, Jeff Hinton and co had just sort of invented that in academia, but no one in industry knew about it. We love reinforcement learning. We thought that could be scaled up, but also understanding about the human brain had advanced quite a lot in the decade prior with fMRI machines and other things. So we could get some good hints about architectures and algorithms and sort of representations maybe that the brain uses. So as at a systems level, not at a implementation level. And then the other big things were compute and GPUs, right? So we could see a compute was going to be really useful, and it got to a place where it become commoditized, mostly through the games industry, and that could be taken advantage of. And then the final thing was also mathematical and theoretical definitions of intelligence. So things like AIXI, AIXE, which Shane worked on with his supervisor, Marcus Hutter, which is this sort of theoretical proof really of universal intelligence, which is actually a reinforcement learning system. In the limit, I mean, it assumes infinite compute and infinite memory in the way, like a Turing machine proof. Yes. But I was also waiting to see something like that too, like Turing machines and computation theory that people like Turing and Shannon came up with underpins modern computer science. I was waiting for a theory like that to sort of underpin AGI research. So when I, met Shane and saw he was working on something like that, that to me was a sort of final piece of the jigsaw. So in the early days, I would say that ideas were the most important. For us, it was deep reinforcement learning, scaling up deep learning. Of course, we've seen transformers. So huge leaps, I would say, 3 or 4 if you think from 2010 till now, huge evolutions, things like AlphaGo. And maybe there's a few more still needed. But as we get closer to AI, AGI, I think engineering becomes more and more important, and data, because scale, and of course the recent results of GPT-3 and all the big language models and large models, including our ones, has shown that scale is and large models are clearly going to be a necessary, but perhaps not sufficient, part of an AGI solution.
And throughout that, like you said, and I'd like to give you a big thank you. You're one of the pioneers in this, is sticking by ideas like reinforcement learning, that this can actually work, given actually limited success in the past. And also, which we still don't know, but proudly having the best researchers in the world and talking about solving intelligence. So talking about whatever you call it, AGI or something like this. That, speaking of MIT, that's just something not you wouldn't bring up.
No.
Not maybe you did in like 40, 50 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but that was AI was a place where you do tinkering, very small scale, not very ambitious projects. And maybe the biggest ambitious projects were in the space of robotics and doing like the DARPA challenge.
Sure.
But the task of solving intelligence and believing you can, that's really, really powerful. So in order for engineering to do its work, to have great engineers build great systems, you have to have that belief that threads throughout the whole thing that you can actually solve some of these impossible challenges.
Yeah, that's right. And back in 2010, our mission statement, and still is today, used to be step one, solve intelligence.
Yeah.
Step two, use it to solve everything else.
Yes.
So if you can imagine pitching that to a VC in 2010, the kind of looks we got. We managed to find a few kooky people to back us, but it was tricky. And it got to the point where we wouldn't mention it to any of our professors because they would just eye roll and think we committed career suicide and so there was a lot of things that we had to do, but we always believed it. And one reason, by the way, I've always believed in reinforcement learning is that if you look at neuroscience, that is the way that the primate brain learns. One of the main mechanisms is the dopamine system implements some form of TD learning. It was a very famous result in the late 90s where they saw this in monkeys and as a propagating prediction error. So we again in the limit. This is what I think you can use neuroscience for is at mathematics. When you're doing something as ambitious as trying to solve intelligence and you're it's blue sky research, no one knows how to do it. You need to use any evidence or any source of information you can to help guide you in the right direction or give you confidence you're going in the right direction. So that was one reason we pushed so hard on that. And just going back to your earlier question about organization, the other big thing that I think we innovated with at DeepMind to encourage invention and innovation was the multidisciplinary organization we built and we still have today. So DeepMind originally was a confluence of the most cutting edge knowledge in neuroscience with machine learning, engineering, and mathematics, right? And gaming. And then since then, we built that out even further. So we have philosophers here and ethicists, but also other types of scientists, physicists, and so on. And that's what brings together. I tried to build a sort of new type of Bell Labs, but in its golden era, right? And a new expression of that. To try and foster this incredible sort of innovation machine. So talking about the humans in the machine, DeepMind itself is a learning machine with lots of amazing human minds in it coming together to try and build these learning systems.
If we return to the big ambitious dream of AlphaFold, that may be the early steps on a very long journey in biology, do you think the same kind of approach can be used to predict the structure and function of more complex biological systems? So multi-protein interaction, and then, you can go up from there.
Yeah.
Just simulating bigger and bigger systems that eventually simulate something like the human brain or the human body. It's just the big mush, the mess of the beautiful, resilient mess of biology. Do you see that as a long-term vision?
I do. And I think, if you think about what are the top things I wanted to apply AI to once we had powerful enough systems, biology and curing diseases and understanding biology was right up there, top of my list. That's one of the reasons I personally pushed that myself and with AlphaFold. But I think AlphaFold, amazing as it is just the beginning. And I hope it's evidence of what could be done with computational methods. So, AlphaFold solved this huge problem of the structure of proteins, but biology is dynamic. So really what I imagine from here, and we're working on all these things now, is protein-protein interaction, protein ligand binding, so reacting with molecules. Then you want to build up to pathways, and then eventually a virtual cell. That's my dream, maybe in the next 10 years. And I've been talking actually to a lot of biologist friends of mine, Paul Nurse, who runs runs the Crick Institute, amazing biologist, Nobel Prize winning biologist. We've been discussing for 20 years now virtual cells. Could you build a virtual simulation of a cell? And if you could, that would be incredible for biology and disease discovery, because you could do loads of experiments on the virtual cell and then only at the last stage validate it in the wet lab. So you could, in terms of the search space of discovering new drugs, it takes 10 years roughly to go from identifying a target to having a drug candidate. Maybe that could be shortened to by an order of magnitude if you could do most of that work in silico. So in order to get to a virtual cell, we have to build up understanding of different parts of biology and the interactions, and so we every few years we talk about this. I talked about this with Paul, and then finally last year after AlphaFold, I said now's the time. We can finally go for it, and AlphaFold's the first proof point that this might be possible. And he's very excited. And we have some collaborations with his lab. They're just across the road actually from us. So it's wonderful being here in King's Cross with the Crick Institute across the road, and I think the next steps, I think there's going to be some amazing advances in biology built on top of things like AlphaFold. We're already seeing that with the community doing that after we've open sourced it and released it. I often say that I think if you think of mathematics is the perfect description language for physics, I think AI might end up being the perfect description language for biology, because biology is so messy, it's so emergent, so dynamic and complex. I find it very hard to believe we'll ever get to something as elegant as Newton's laws of motions to describe a cell. Right? It's just too complicated. So I think AI is the right tool for this.
So you have to start at the basic building blocks and use AI to run the simulation for all those building blocks. So have a very strong way to do prediction of what, given these building blocks, what kind of biology, how the function and the evolution of that biological system. It's almost like a cellular automata. You have to run it. You can't analyze it from a high level. You have to take the basic ingredients, figure out the rules, and let it run. But in this case, the rules are very difficult to figure out.
Yes,
you have to learn them.
That's exactly it. So the biology is too complicated to figure out the rules. It's too emergent, too dynamic, say, compared to a physics system like the motion of a planet.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to learn the rules. And that's exactly the type of systems that we're building.
So you mentioned you've open sourced AlphaFold and even the data involved. To me personally, also really happy and a big thank you for open sourcing Mijoko, the physics simulation engine that's often used for robotics research and so on. So I think that's a pretty gangster move. So what's the this very few companies or people would do that kind of thing. What's the philosophy behind that?
It's a case-by-case basis. And in both those cases, we felt that was the maximum benefit to humanity to do that and the scientific community. In one case, the robotics physics community with Mijoko. So
we purchased it.
We purchased it Yes, we purchased it for the express principle to open source it. So,
awesome.
hope people appreciate that. It's great to hear that you do. And then the second thing was, and mostly we did it because the person building it was not able to cope with supporting it anymore because it got too big for him. He's an amazing professor who built it in the first place. So we helped him out with that. And then with AlphaFold, it's even bigger, I would say. And I think in that case, we decided that there were so many downstream applications of AlphaFold that we couldn't possibly even imagine what they all were. So the best way to accelerate drug discovery and also fundamental research would be to give all that data away and the system itself. It's been so gratifying to see what people have done that within just 1 year, which is a short amount of time in science, and it's been used by over 500,000 researchers have used it. We think that's almost every biologist in the world. I think there's roughly 500,000 biologists in the world, professional biologists, have used it to look at their proteins of interest. We've seen amazing fundamental research done. So a couple of weeks ago, front cover, there was a whole special issue of Science, including the front cover, which had the nuclear pore complex on it, which is one of the biggest proteins in the body. The nuclear pore complex is a protein that governs all the nutrients going in and out of your cell nucleus. So they're like little gateways that open and close to let things go in and out of your cell nucleus. So they're really important, but they're huge because they're massive donut ring shaped things. And they've been looking to try and figure out that structure for decades. And they have lots of, experimental data, but it's too low resolution. There's bits missing. And they were able to, like a giant Lego jigsaw puzzle, use AlphaFold predictions plus experimental data, and combined those two independent sources of information. Actually, 4 different groups around the world were able to put it together at the more or less simultaneously using AlphaFold predictions. So that's been amazing to see. And pretty much every pharma company, every drug company executive I've spoken to has said that their teams are using AlphaFold to accelerate whatever drugs they're trying to discover. So I think the knock-on effect has been enormous in terms of the impact that AlphaFold has made.
And it's probably it's creating biologists. It's bringing more people into the field, both on the excitement and both on the technical skills involved. And it's almost like a gateway drug to biology.
Yes, it is. And to get more computational people involved too, exactly. Hopefully. And I think for us, the next stage, as I said, in future, we have to have other considerations too. We're building on top of AlphaFold and these other ideas I discussed with you about protein-protein interactions and genomics and other things. And not everything will be open source. Some of it we'll do commercially because that will be the best way to actually get the most resources and impact behind it. In other ways, some other projects will do non-profit style. And also we have to consider for future things as well, safety and ethics as well, like, synthetic biology, there is dual use. And we have to think about that as well. With AlphaFold, we consulted with 30 different bioethicists and other people expert in this field to make sure it was safe before we released it. So there'll be other considerations in future, but for right now, I think AlphaFold is a kind of a gift from us to the scientific community.
So I'm pretty sure that something like AlphaFold would be part of Nobel Prizes in the future. But us humans, of course, are horrible with credit assignment. So we'll, of course, give it to the humans. Do you think there will be a day when AI system can't be denied that it earned that Nobel Prize? Do you think we will see that in the 21st century?
It depends what type of AIs we end up building, right? Whether they're, goal-seeking agents who specifies the goals, who comes up with the hypotheses, who determines which problems to tackle, right? So
I think tweets about it, announcement of the results.
Yes, tweets announcement about results exactly as part of it. So I think right now, of course, it's amazing human ingenuity that's behind these systems, and then the system, in my opinion, is just a tool. It would be a bit like saying with Galileo and his telescope, the ingenuity, the credit should go to the telescope. I mean, it's clearly Galileo building the tool, which he then uses. So I still see that in the same way today, even though these tools learn for themselves. I think of things like AlphaFold and the things we're building as the ultimate tools for science and for acquiring new knowledge, to help us as scientists acquire new knowledge. I think one day there will come a point where an AI system may solve or come up with something like general relativity off its own bat, not just by averaging everything on the internet or averaging everything on PubMed, although that would be interesting to see what that would come up with. So that to me is a bit like our earlier debate about creativity, inventing Go rather than just coming up with a good Go move. And so I think to if we wanted to give it the credit of like a Nobel type of thing, then it would need to invent Go and sort of invent that new conjecture out of the blue. Rather than being specified by the human scientists or the human creators. So I think right now it's definitely just a tool.
Although it is interesting how far you get by averaging everything on the internet, like you said, because, a lot of people do see science as you're always standing on the shoulders of giants. And the question is, how much are you really reaching up above the shoulders of giants? Maybe it's just simulating different kinds of results of the past, with ultimately this new perspective that gives you this breakthrough idea. But that idea may not be novel in the way that it can't be already discovered on the internet. Maybe the Nobel Prizes of the next 100 years are already all there on the internet to be discovered.
They could be. I mean, I think this is one of the big mysteries, I think, is that I first of all, I believe a lot of the big new breakthroughs that are going to come in the next few decades, and even in the last decade, are going to come at the intersection between different subject areas, where there'll be some new connection that's found between what seemingly were disparate areas. And one can even think of DeepMind as I said earlier, as a sort of interdisciplinary between neuroscience ideas and AI engineering ideas originally. And so I think there's that. And then one of the things we can't imagine today is, and one of the reasons I think we were so surprised by how well large models worked, is that actually it's very hard for our limited human minds, to understand what it would be like to read the whole internet, right? I think we can do a thought experiment, and I used to do this of like, well, what if I read the whole of Wikipedia? What would I know? And I think our minds can just about comprehend maybe what that would be like, but the whole internet is beyond comprehension. So I think we just don't understand what it would be like to be able to hold all of that in mind, potentially, right? And then active at once, and then maybe what are the connections that are available there. So I think no doubt there are huge things to be discovered just like that. But I do think there is this other type of creativity, of a true spark of new knowledge, new idea, never thought before about, can't be averaged from things that are known. That really, of course, everything nobody creates in a vacuum. So there must be clues somewhere, but just a unique way of putting those things together. I think some of the greatest scientists in history have displayed that, I would say, although it's very hard to know, going back to their time, what was exactly known when they came up with those things.
Although you're making me really think, because just the thought experiment of deeply knowing 100 Wikipedia pages, I don't think I can. I've been really impressed by Wikipedia for technical topics.
Yeah.
So if you know 100 pages or 1,000 pages, I don't think you can truly comprehend what kind of intelligence that is.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful intelligence. If you know how to use that and integrate that information correctly,
yes,
I think you can go really far.
Yeah.
You can probably construct thought experiments based on that, like simulate different ideas. So if this is true, let me run this thought experiment, then maybe this is true. It's not really invention. It's like just taking literally the knowledge and using it to construct a very basic simulation of the world. I mean, some argue it's romantic in part, but Einstein would do the same kind of things with thought experiments.
Yeah,
right?
One could imagine doing that systematically across millions of Wikipedia pages, plus PubMed, all these things. I think there are many things to be discovered like that are hugely useful. You could imagine, and I want us to do some of these things in material science, like room temperature superconductors is something on my list one day that I'd like to have an AI system to help build better optimized batteries, all of these sort of mechanical things. I think a systematic sort of search could be guided by a model, could be extremely powerful.
So speaking of which, you have a paper on nuclear fusion. Magnetic control of tokamak plasmas through deep reinforcement learning. So you're seeking to solve nuclear fusion with deep RL. So it's doing control of high temperature plasmas. Can you explain this work? And can AI eventually solve nuclear fusion?
It's been very fun last year or two and very productive, because we've been ticking off a lot of my dream projects, if you like, of things that I've collected over the years of areas of science that I would like to, I think could be very transformative if we helped accelerate, and are really interesting problems, scientific challenges in of themselves.
So this is energy.
So energy, yes, exactly. So energy and climate. So we talked about disease and biology as being one of the biggest places I think AI can help with. I think energy and climate is another one. So maybe they would be my top two. And fusion is one area I think AI can help with. Now, fusion has many challenges, mostly physics and material science and engineering challenges as well, to build these massive fusion reactors and contain the plasma. And what we try to do, and whenever we go into a new field to apply our systems, is we look for, we talk to domain experts. We try and find the best people in the world to collaborate with. And in this case, in fusion, we collaborated with EPFL in Switzerland, the Swiss Technical Institute, who are amazing. They have a test reactor that they were willing to let us use, which, I double checked with the team we were going to use carefully and safely. I was impressed they managed to persuade them to let us use it. And it's an amazing test reactor they have there, and they try all sorts of pretty crazy experiments on it. And what we tend to look at is, if we go into a new domain like fusion, what are all the bottleneck problems like thinking from first principles. What are all the bottleneck problems that are still stopping fusion working today? And then we get a fusion expert to tell us, and then we look at those bottlenecks and we look at which ones are amenable to our AI methods today.
Yes.
Right. And would be interesting from a research perspective, from our point of view, from an AI point of view, and that would address one of their bottlenecks. And in this case, plasma control was perfect. So, the plasma, it's 1,000,000 degrees Celsius, something like that. It's hotter than the sun. And there's obviously no material that can contain it. So they have to be containing these very powerful superconducting magnetic fields. But the problem is plasma is pretty unstable, as you imagine. You're kind of holding a mini star in a reactor. So, you kind of want to predict ahead of time what the plasma is going to do, so you can move the magnetic field within a few milliseconds, to basically contain what it's going to do next. So it seems like a perfect problem if you think of it for like a reinforcement learning prediction problem. So, you got a controller, you're going to move the magnetic field, and until we came along, they were doing it with traditional operational research type of controllers, which are kind of handcrafted. And the problem is, of course, they can't react in the moment to something the plasma is doing. They have to be hard coded. And again, knowing that that's normally our go-to solution, is we would like to learn that instead. And they also had a simulator of these plasma. So there were lots of criteria that matched what we like to use.
So can AI eventually solve nuclear fusion?
Well, so with this problem, and we published it in a Nature paper last year, we held the plasma in a specific shapes. So actually, it's almost like carving the plasma into different shapes, okay, and hold it there for a record amount of time. So that's one of the problems of fusion sort of solved.
So have a controller that's able to, no matter the shape,
contain it.
Contain
it and hold it in structure. And there's different shapes that are better for the energy productions, called droplets and so on. So that was huge. And now we're talking to lots of fusion startups to see what's the next problem we can tackle in the fusion area.
So another fascinating place, in a paper titled "Pushing the Frontiers of Density Functionals by Solving the Fractional Electron Problem." So you're taking on modeling and simulating the quantum mechanical behavior of electrons.
Yes.
Can you explain this work, and can AI model and simulate arbitrary quantum mechanical systems in the future?
Yeah, so this is another problem I've had my eye on for decade or more, which is sort of simulating the properties of electrons. If you can do that, you can basically describe how elements and materials and substances work. So it's kind of like fundamental if you want to advance material science. We have Schrodinger's equation, and then we have approximations to that, density functional theory. These things are famous, and people try and write approximations to these functionals and kind of come up with descriptions of the electron clouds, where they're going to go, how they're going to interact when you put two elements together. And what we try to do is learn a simulation, learn a functional that will describe more types of chemistry. So until now, you can run expensive simulations, but then you can only simulate very small molecules, very simple molecules. We would like to simulate large materials. And so today there's no way of doing that. And we're building up towards building functionals that approximate Schrodinger's equation and then allow you to describe what the electrons are doing. And all material sort of science and material properties are governed by the electrons and how they interact.
So have a good summarization of the simulation through the functional, but one that is still close to what the actual simulation would come out with. So how difficult is that task? What's involved in that task? Is it running those complicated simulations and learning the task of mapping from the initial conditions and the parameters of the simulation, learning what the functional would be?
Yeah. So it's pretty tricky, and we've done it with, the nice thing is we can run a lot of the simulations, the molecular dynamic simulations on our compute clusters. And so that generates a lot of data. So in this case, the data is generated. So we like those sort of systems, and that's why we use games. It's simulated, generated data. And we can kind of create as much of it as we want, really, and just leave some, if any computers are free in the cloud, we run some of these calculations, right? Compute cluster
I
calculations.
like how the free compute time is used up on quantum mechanics.
Yeah, quantum mechanics, exactly. Simulations and protein simulations and other things. And so, when you're not searching on YouTube for video, cat videos, we're using those computers usefully in quantum chemistry. It's the idea.
Fine.
And putting them to good use. And then all of that computational data that's generated, we can then try and learn the functionals from that, which of course are way more efficient once we learn the functional than running those simulations would be.
Do you think one day AI may allow us to do something like basically crack open physics? So do something like travel faster than the speed of light?
My ultimate aim has always been with AI is the reason I am personally working on AI for my whole life was to build a tool to help us understand the universe. So I wanted to, and that means physics really, and the nature of reality. So I don't think we have systems that are capable of doing that yet, but when we get towards AGI, I think that's one of the first things I think we should apply AGI to. I would like to test the limits of physics and our knowledge of physics. There's so many things we don't know. This is one thing I find fascinating about science, and as a huge proponent of the scientific method as being one of the greatest ideas humanity's ever had and allowed us to progress with our knowledge. But I think as a true scientist, I think what you find is the more you find out, the more you realize we don't know. And I always think that it's surprising that more people aren't troubled. Every night I think about all these things we interact with all the time that we have no idea how they work. Time, consciousness, gravity, life. These are all the fundamental things of nature.
I think the way
we don't really know what they are.
To live life, we pin certain assumptions on them and kind of treat our assumptions as if they're fact.
Yeah.
That allows us to sort of
box them off somehow.
Yeah, box them off somehow.
Yeah.
But the reality is, when you think of time, you should remind yourself, you should put it off take it off the shelf and realize, like, no, we have a bunch of assumptions. There's even now a lot of debate. There's a lot of uncertainty about exactly what is time. Is there an era of time? There's a lot of fundamental questions that you can't just make assumptions about. And maybe AI allows you to not put anything on the shelf.
Yeah.
Not make any hard assumptions and really open it up and see what.
Exactly. I think we should be truly open-minded about that. And exactly that, not be dogmatic to a particular theory. It'll also allow us to build better tools, experimental tools, eventually, that can then test certain theories that may not be testable today things about like what we spoke about at the beginning about the computational nature of the universe, how one might, if that was true, how one might go about testing that, right? And how much, there are people who've conjectured, people like Scott Aronson and others, about, how much information can a specific Planck unit of space and time contain, right? So one might be able to think about testing those ideas if you had AI helping you build some new exquisite experimental tools. This is what I imagine, many decades from now we'll be able to do.
And what kind of questions can be answered through running a simulation of them? So that there's a bunch of physics simulations you can imagine that could be run in some kind of efficient way, much like you're doing in the quantum simulation work, and perhaps even the origin of life. So figuring out how, going even back before the work of AlphaFold begins, of how this whole thing emerges from a rock, from a static thing. Do you think AI will allow us to? Is that something you have your eye on? Is trying to understand the origin of life? First of all, yourself, what do you think? How the heck did life originate on Earth?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll come to that in a second, but I think the ultimate use of AI is to kind of use it to accelerate science to the maximum. So I think of it a little bit like the tree of all knowledge. If you imagine that's all the knowledge there is in the universe to attain, and we sort of barely scratched the surface of that so far. Even though we've done pretty well since the Enlightenment, right, as humanity. And I think AI will turbocharge all of that, like we've seen with AlphaFold. And I want to explore as much of that tree of knowledge as it's possible to do. And I think that involves AI helping us with understanding or finding patterns, but also potentially designing and building new tools, experimental tools. So I think that's all, and also running simulations and learning simulations. All of that we're sort of doing at a baby steps level here. But I can imagine that in the decades to come, as what's the full flourishing of that line of thinking, it's going to be truly incredible, I would say.
If I visualize this tree of knowledge, something tells me that tree of knowledge for humans is much smaller. In the set of all possible trees of knowledge, it's actually quite small, given our cognitive limitations, limited cognitive capabilities. That even with the tools we build, we still won't be able to understand a lot of things, and that's perhaps what non-human systems might be able to reach farther, not just as tools, but in themselves understanding something that they can bring back.
Yeah, it could well be. So, I mean, there's so many things that are sort of encapsulated in what you just said there. I think, first of all, there's two different things. There's like, what do we understand today?
Yeah.
What could the human mind understand? And what is the totality of what is there to be understood?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's three concentric, you can think of them as three larger and larger trees, or exploring more branches of that tree. And I think with AI, we're going to explore that whole lot. Now, the question is if you think about what is the totality of what could be understood, there may be some fundamental physics reasons why certain things can't be understood, like what's outside a simulation or outside the universe. Maybe it's not understandable from within the universe. So there may be some hard constraints like that.
It could be smaller constraints, like we think of space-time as fundamental. Our human brains are really used to this idea of a three-dimensional world with time.
Right.
Maybe,
but our tools could go beyond that.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have that limitation necessarily. They could think in 11 dimensions, 12 dimensions, whatever is needed. But we could still maybe understand that in several different ways. The example I always give is when I play Garry Kasparov at speed chess, or we've talked about chess and these kind of things. If you're reasonably good at chess, you can't come up with the move Garry comes up with in his move, but he can explain it to you.
And you
right?
can understand.
And you can understand post hoc the reasoning.
Yeah.
So I think there's an even further level of like, well, maybe you couldn't have invented that thing, but going back to using language again, perhaps you can understand and appreciate that. Same way like you can appreciate, Vivaldi or Mozart or something you can appreciate the beauty of that without being able to construct it yourself, right? Invent the music yourself. So I think we see this in all forms of life. So it'll be that times, a million, but you can imagine also one sign of intelligence is the ability to explain things clearly and simply, right? People like Richard Feynman, another one of my all-time heroes, used to say that, right? If you can't, if you can explain something simply, then that's the best sign. A complex topic simply, then that's one of the best signs of you understanding it.
Yeah.
So
I can see myself talking trash to an AI system in that way.
Yes.
It gets frustrated how dumb I am in trying to explain something to me. I was like, well, that means you're not intelligent, because if you were intelligent, you'd be able to explain it simply.
Yeah, of course. There's also the other option. Of course, we could enhance ourselves and with our devices. We are already sort of symbiotic with our compute devices, right? With our phones and other things, and there's stuff like Neuralink and etc. that could advance that further. So I think there's lots of really amazing possibilities that I could foresee from here.
Well, let me ask you some wild questions. So out there looking for friends, do you think there's a lot of alien civilizations out there?
So I guess this also goes back to your origin of life question too,
Yes.
because I think that's key. My personal opinion, looking at all this, and it's one of my hobbies, physics, I guess. So I it's something I think about a lot and talk to a lot of experts on, and read a lot of books on. And I think my feeling currently is that we are alone. I think that's the most likely scenario given what evidence we have. So and the reasoning is, I think that we've tried since things like SETI program, and I guess since the dawning of the space age, we've had telescopes, open radio telescopes, and other things. And if you think about and try to detect signals, now if you think about the evolution of humans on Earth, we could have easily been a million years ahead of our time now, or a million years behind, right? Easily, with just some slightly different quirk thing happening hundreds of thousands of years ago. Things could have been slightly different. If the meteor had hit the dinosaurs a million years earlier, maybe things would have evolved. We'd be a million years ahead of where we are now. So what that means is, if you imagine where humanity will be in a few hundred years, let alone a million years, especially if we hopefully solve things like climate change and other things, and we continue to flourish, and we build things like AI, and we do space traveling and all of the stuff that humans have dreamed of for forever, right? And sci-fi has talked about forever. We will be spreading across the stars, right? And von Neumann famously calculated, it would only take about 1 million years if you sent out von Neumann probes to the nearest other solar systems, and then all they did was build 2 more versions of themselves and sent those 2 out to the next nearest systems. Within 1 million years, I think you would have one of these probes in every system in the galaxy. Mm-hmm. So it's not actually in cosmological time. That's actually a very short amount of time. So, people like Dyson have thought about constructing Dyson spheres around stars to collect all the energy coming out of the star. That there would be constructions like that would be visible across space, probably even across a galaxy. So, and then, if you think about all of our radio, television emissions that have gone out since the 30s and 40s, imagine 1 million years of that, and now hundreds of civilizations doing that. When we opened our ears, at the point we got technologically sophisticated enough in the space age, we should have heard a cacophony of voices. We should have joined that cacophony of voices. And what we did, we opened our ears and we heard nothing. And many people who argue that there are aliens would say, well, we haven't really done exhaustive search yet, and maybe we're looking in the wrong bands, and we've got the wrong devices, and we wouldn't notice what an alien form was like, because it'd be so different to what we're used to. But I don't really buy that it shouldn't be as difficult as that. I think we've searched enough.
It should be everywhere.
It should be everywhere. We should see Dyson spheres being put up, suns blinking in and out. There should be a lot of evidence for those things. And then there are other people who argue, well, the sort of safari view of we're a primitive species still because we're not spacefaring yet, and we're, there's some kind of global, universal rule not to interfere, Star Trek rule. But look, we can't even coordinate humans to deal with climate change, and we're one species. What is the chance that of all of these different human civilization, alien civilizations, they would have the same priorities and agree across these kind of matters? And even if that was true, and we were in some sort of safari for our own good, to me, that's not much different from the simulation hypothesis. Because what does it mean, the simulation hypothesis? I think in its most fundamental level, it means what we're seeing is not quite reality. Right? There's something more deeper underlying it, maybe computational. Now, if we were in a sort of safari park and everything we were seeing was a hologram and it was projected by the aliens or whatever, that to me is not much different with thinking we're inside of another universe, because we still can't see true reality. Right?
I mean, there's other explanations. It could be that the way they're communicating is just fundamentally different, that we're too dumb to understand the much better methods of communication they have. It could be, I mean, it's silly to say, but our own thoughts could be the methods by which they're communicating. Like the place from which our ideas, writers talk about this, like the muse.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like very kind of wild, but it could be thoughts. It could be some interactions with our mind that we think are originating from us is actually something that is coming from other life forms elsewhere. Consciousness itself might be that.
It could be, but I don't see any sensible argument to the why would all of the alien species behave in this way? Yeah, some of them will be more primitive. They would be close to our level. There should be a whole sort of normal distribution of these things, right? Some would be aggressive, some would be, curious. Others would be very stoical and philosophical, because maybe they're 1 million years older than us. But it's not. It shouldn't be like. One alien civilization might be like that, communicating thoughts and others. But I don't see why potentially the hundreds there should be would be uniform in this way, right?
It could be a violent dictatorship that the people, the alien civilizations that become successful, gain the ability to be destructive, an order of magnitude more destructive. But of course, the sad thought, well, either humans are very special. We took a lot of leaps that arrived at what it means to be human.
Yeah.
there's a question there, which was the hardest,
Yeah.
which was the most special. But also, if others have reached this level, and maybe many others have reached this level, the great filter that prevented them from going farther to becoming a multiplanetary species or reaching out into the stars. And those are really important questions for us, whether there's other alien civilizations out there or not. This is very useful for us to think about. If we destroy ourselves, how will we do it, and how easy is it to do?
Yeah. Well, these are big questions, and I've thought about these a lot. But the interesting thing is that if we're alone, that's somewhat comforting from the great filter perspective, because it probably means the great filters are past us.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they are. So going back to your origin of life question, there are some incredible things that no one knows how happened. Like obviously the first life form from chemical soup, that seems pretty hard. But I would guess the multicellular, I wouldn't be that surprised if we saw single cell sort of life forms elsewhere, bacteria type things. But multicellular life seems incredibly hard, that step of, capturing mitochondria and then sort of using that as part of yourself, when you've just eaten it.
Would you say that's the biggest, the most, like, if you had to choose one sort of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one sentence summary of like, oh, those clever creatures did this, that would be the multicellular.
I think that's probably the one that's the biggest. I mean, there's a great book called The 10 Great Inventions of Evolution by Nick Lane, and he speculates on 10 of these, what could be great filters. I think that's one. I think the advent of intelligence and conscious intelligence, and in order to us to be able to do science and things like that, is huge as well. I mean, it's only evolved once as far as in Earth history. So that would be a later candidate, but there's certainly for the early candidates, I think multicellular life forms is huge.
By the way, it's interesting to ask you if you can hypothesize about what is the origin of intelligence. Is it that we started cooking meat over fire? Is it that we somehow figured out that we could be very powerful when we started collaborating? So cooperation between our ancestors, so that we can overthrow the alpha male. What is it, Richard? I talked to Richard Ranham, who thinks we're all just beta males who figured out how to collaborate to defeat the one, the dictator, the authoritarian alpha male that controlled the tribe. Is there other explanation? Was there 2001 Space Odyssey type of monolith that came down to Earth?
Well, I think all of those things you suggest are good candidates: fire and cooking, right? So that's clearly important for energy, energy efficiency. Cooking our meat and then being able to be more efficient about eating it and consuming the energy. I think that's huge. And then utilizing fire and tools. I think you're right about the tribal cooperation aspects, and probably language as part of that.
Yes.
Because probably that's what allowed us to outcompete Neanderthals and perhaps less cooperative species. So that may be the case. Tool making, spears, axes. I think that let us. I mean, I think it's pretty clear now that humans were responsible for a lot of the extinctions of megafauna, especially in the Americas when humans arrived. So you can imagine, once you discover tool usage, how powerful that would have been and how scary for animals. So I think all of those could have been explanations for it. The interesting thing is that it's a bit like general intelligence too, is it's very costly to begin with to have a brain, and especially a general purpose brain rather than a special purpose one, because the amount of energy our brains use, I think it's like 20% of the body's energy, and it's massive. And when you're thinking chess, one of the funny things that we used to say is it's as much as a racing driver uses for a whole Formula One race, just playing a game of serious high level chess, which you wouldn't think, just sitting there, because the brain's using so much energy. So in order for an organism to justify that, there has to be a huge payoff. And the problem with half a brain or half intelligence, say an IQs of like a monkey brain, it's not clear you can justify that evolutionary until you get to the human level brain. And so, but how do you do that jump? It's very difficult, which is why I think it's only been done once, from the sort of specialized brains that you see in animals to this sort of general purpose Turing powerful brains that humans have, and which allows us to invent the modern world. It takes a lot to cross that barrier. And I think we've seen the same with AI systems, which is that maybe until very recently, it's always been easier to craft a specific solution to a problem like chess than it has been to build a general learning system that could potentially do many things. Because initially, that system will be way worse than less efficient than the specialized system.
So one of the interesting